Welcome back. Today's Tuesday, the 13th of June, 2023. It's 97 degrees, and this is what my life is going to be like for a little bit. That's okay. Today, or this evening, really, the work that I'm going to be doing may not turn into actually any work at all. I need to figure out how to relocate the fuel sender, the float device that sends the fuel quantity to the instrument panel. I need to relocate it from the first bay of the fuel tank into the second bay of the fuel tank, because that's the tank that's going to have the flop tube for the inverted fuel system. Ordinarily, this mounting plate right here would mount the fuel pickup line and the fuel sender, and they would be in the first bay. With the flop tube is actually going to be mounted through the attach bracket that goes up here. This is just going to be a blank plate that goes over that, and the rest of that bay is going to be left open for the flop tube to flop. So the fuel sender needs to be moved into the second bay, which means that this back baffle, this is what closes out the tanks. I need to make a hole somewhere around here so that the fuel sender could be mounted in this bay. And then once that's done, I need to figure out the geometry, because it's going to be a little bit different than if it's mounted in its traditional position. So today could just be a lot of head scratching, looking at plans, making measurements, and not actually drilling or cutting a hole. We'll see. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that today I put my fuel tanks in my truck and I drove out to the airport to solicit some criticism from my technical advisor, who happens to be the president of my EAA chapter. Super knowledgeable guy, has a beautiful RV-8 that he built 20 years ago, and a even more beautiful RV-10 that he built, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. Anyways, the first thing he said was that my work was meticulous, which I thought was funny because it looks so sloppy to me. And I asked him if he thought that I should go through and do a second application of sealant to get a little bit thicker, fuller fillets along the edges of those spar flanges. And he agreed with that. So that'll be a simple process to do. I heard somebody say that if you look at it and you say, there's no way that that's going to leak, it's not going to leak. But if you look at it and you say, I don't think that's going to leak, it's probably going to leak. So I'm just going to add a little insurance there with some sealant, but I'm not going to do any of that today. Anyways, that's a long introduction for what's going to be a lot of very slow work. So enjoy episode 69, maybe? Yeah, we'll see. Anyways, let's just get to building airplanes and stop talking.
So this was about an hour in the shop, and it turned out to be fairly productive. The first thing I'm doing here is just unpacking this Stuart Warner fuel sending unit and trying to familiarize myself with the function and the instructions. There are 2 sets of instructions, one from Vans and then one that comes in the package from Stuart Warner. This is a pretty common fuel sending unit. Like, you can pick it up at AutoZone or any place like that. That's one of the advantages of experimental aircraft like this, is that you don't need certificated parts like you would for a certificated aircraft. It's a very simple thing. I'm just doing a lot of measuring because I want to understand exactly what size hole I need to cut into that that baffle, and then also the location, which is why I have the mounting plate out where it normally would mount, so I can start to understand the geometry that I'm going to try to transpose into the second bay. And I'm not only moving it further out on the wing or the fuel tank, but I'm actually changing the orientation by 90 degrees. Grabbed a multimeter to check the function. There are values given for what it should read when the arm is in the full position versus the empty position, and it checked out accurately. I think the numbers are something like 240 empty and 30 full, or maybe the opposite. And then here I've Cleco the mounting plate into its original position just because I want to see what the orientation is, and then checking the geometry to try to figure out those angles, because you can see that they call it the shepherd's crook. That arm is just a straight piece of wire, and you need to make a few bends in it to get it to where you need it to be. I grabbed one of the end ribs and just clecoed it onto that baffle because I want to know exactly where the edge of the flange is, so that when whatever position I mount this at, I want to make sure that there's at least a half-inch clearance from the end of the float and the edge of the rib flange. I just want to eliminate any possibility of any sort of interference, but I do want to get it as close to that rib as possible, because the further out you go, the less accurate it will be, because you're getting further away from the low part of the tank. Keeping in mind that the wings have a dihedral, so as they move outboard, they kind of tip upward. So the nearer you are to the fuselage, the lower the point of the tank. Anyways, you know what I mean. So I did figure out the whole location. Just a lot of back and forth with center finding ruler to get dead on with it. You don't have to be too tricky about it, because that if you take measurements off of the plate, the original mounting plate, it's basically just centered, dead center, top to bottom. So you don't have to have any weird adjustments there. Later, when I do cut the hole, I'll just have to be careful that the hole pattern for the mounting plate is clocked correctly, because it's not like top dead center where the top mounting hole is. It's a little cocked to one side. I grabbed the fuel tank. I just wanted to see what clearance would be like over that stiffener, and the crook of the curve in the shepherd's crook is enough to overcome that. And so Vans gives instructions on what the length of the wire is supposed to be, and then where the bends are supposed to be made with those dimensions. They're slightly different for the left fuel tank than they are for the right fuel tank. The senders are specifically left and right. They're not the same for each tank. And then in the fuel senders, they give a different list, or a different set of instructions that says if the opening in the tank is X amount of inches, this is the length you cut, and these are where you make the bends. Since this geometry is a little bit different, I decided to go off of the Stuart Warner instructions and do a lot of math to try to figure out the proper length to cut this. And then I went from there to see if that was, and then there's lots and lots of measuring, because the Stuart Warner measurements are taken not from the end of the what I would think be the natural thing, like the straight piece of wire, but actually the middle of the crook, like the middle of that float. So I came up with a measurement that was different than the Vans one, but again, I'm mounting it in a different location and a different orientation. And presumably that, well, when I did it, presumably the span from the top to the bottom of the tank would be different where I'm doing it than where Vans has it set. And actually, now that I think about it, it's not really much different at all, because I'm mounting this to the baffle. Vans mounts it to the rib, and further forward, the end point, or where the float would ultimately be, is actually about the same on either side. So anyways, making a cut here at, I think I did like 6 1/8 inches from the middle of the crook, so to speak. And then I'll get into the business of bending it. And then later, when this is all done, I'll get into the business of ordering another one because once it was all bent and everything like that, the geometry just wasn't quite right. Ultimately, what you want is when it swings to the high point or the low point through its range, you want it to be no more than 1/8 of an inch off of touching the fuel tank skin top and bottom. And I wasn't getting that. So I did a little more research from other people who have done this, and coincidentally, they have found that the easiest thing to do is just to go with the original van's measurements for the other position and then massage it a little bit, because it's actually pretty close there. But you can see what it looks like there when it's done. There are a couple of 90-degree bends that you need to make that are 90 degrees out of sync with each other. And I disappeared there to go see what that looked like, sort of mocked up in the tank, and I wasn't happy with the fit. So now I'm looking at how quickly can I get one of these. They're not expensive. So that's the day. I determined where the hole needs to be made in the baffle and learned a little bit more about that float. So we'll go from there.